Chapter 18. Rose still had her teeth clenched together to control the chatter they wished to make. She could see very little through the carriage's dirty windows. Being unfamiliar with the part of town they were driving through anyway, she would not have been able to figure out where they were, even if she could see well. She tried again to reason with her captor. "Where are you taking me, my lord?" "Somewhere where you won't be causing me any more grief," came the flat reply. "Are you planning on killing me?" she asked with as firm a voice as she could muster. "You really aren't the usual sort of miss, are you?" Broderick stated, with a glimmer of respect showing in his tone. "Any young lady I've ever had the misfortune of dealing with would be screaming blue murder by this point, or else prostrate in a dead faint." "Have you had much experience in abducting young ladies in the past, my lord?" Rose asked tartly. This brought an amused twist to his lips. "Not over much experience, miss, but I do find your sort to usually be much less in control of their wits than you." Broderick finally looked straight at her, which caused a sense of foreboding to descend upon Rose. She tried valiantly to ignore it. "How did you find out about my plans for the Duke of Wrentham?" he asked, almost pleasantly. She didn't see any point in avoiding the truth. "I overheard you speaking to Lord Austen at the Countess of Yorkley's musicale. It was during the intermission. The two of you were sitting a couple of rows behind me. You obviously did not notice me, or else you thought I was too far away to hear you. In fact, I did not hear most of what you were saying, as I was distracted by watching everyone milling about. But when you mentioned Wrentham's name, my ears perked up." "And so then you had to run out and tell him about it, didn't you?" Broderick sneered. Rose shrugged, refusing to be cowed by the likes of him. "It seemed like the best course of action at the time." "What did you hope to gain by telling his grace?" "I hope to save him from your clutches," Rose brazenly replied. "But instead it is you who is in my clutches," Broderick taunted. Again Rose shrugged, although this time it was a bit forced. "I am most certain my father will save me." "Your father will not even know of your disappearance for a few more hours yet. And then, when he does, there will be the note you were going to write to explain it all away." "What do you hope to gain by all of this?" Rose inquired, ignoring his reference to any note-writing. At the back of her mind, she was busily trying to compose a note that would send a message to her father without alerting Broderick to her plans. "I guess there's no harm in telling you. If I can keep your father distracted and you out of the way, I plan to get the prince to sign over to me control of the lands he is about to regain during the negotiations in Paris." "But why would he sign them over to you? Are you even acquainted with His Majesty?" Rose was puzzled over the knight's ambitions. "Of course I'm acquainted with Prinny, and he is going to sign them over to me because I have been working studiously at convincing him that I would be the best man for the job. I would have had the Duke's influence to seal the deal if not for your interference. But if your father isn't around to sway him otherwise, I should still be able to make it all come about." "So, then you're going to kill me, aren't you?" Rose concluded. "What makes you say that?" Rose could see that her outward calm was disconcerting to her captor. It gave her a strange sense of satisfaction, but she could not keep the tremble completely from her chin as she answered the creepy man. "I cannot imagine you wish to go to the trouble of keeping me locked up for the rest of my days. But if you let me go, you cannot be certain that I will not broadcast your dastardly deeds to everyone who will listen." Broderick looked steadily at his captive, surprise flickering in his wicked eyes. "You don't seem overly troubled by the prospect." "I refuse to entertain you with my hand-wringing," she replied frostily, as she also thought to herself, "and I refuse to beg you to do otherwise." Turning her head toward the window, Rose set herself to the task of ignoring the despicable man. She wished fervently that she could tell where they were going. As the carriage began to slow, she was unsure if she was happy or not that her wish was about to be granted. Not that she had any idea of where they were, but she was about to find out what type of destination they had been bound for. She had lost track of time, so she was unsure how far they had travelled, but as she took a deep breath, the scent of brackish water led her to believe they were near the river. "Are you taking me out of the country?" she gasped with fear. Broderick's diabolically amused grin did not reassure Rose, but he finally responded directly to a question. I have no current plans of taking you, or having you taken, out of the country. I'm quite sure you can be convinced to behave properly, so that we shan't have to go to such extremes as that, nor of killing you, as you previously suggested. I have a lovely little place near here that will do quite nicely for keeping you out of the way for the time being. As the carriage came to a stop, Rose gathered her wits, thinking she might be able to make a break for it somehow. She had no idea of where she was, nor of how she could find her way home, but for a moment she thought anything would be preferable to being in Broderick's clutches. Her intentions must have been written upon her features, as evidenced by the knight's next words. Do not do anything so foolish as to try to get away, my dear. I know you do not relish my company, but I can assure you that you will be far safer with me than you will be wandering about the stews on your own at this time of the night, or at any time for that matter. This neighbourhood is not accustomed to the presence of one such as you, and I will not vouch for your safety if you venture abroad. Rose gulped down the knot of fear his words had brought to her throat. She was well aware that he was trying to terrify her, but she also knew quite well there was truth in his words. Although she was supposed to be a sheltered society debutante, as a diplomat's daughter she was privy to some of the tales of the darker sides of city life. She was not safe whichever way she turned. Resolving to do her best to stay alive and whole until morning, when it would be safer to endeavour to escape, she forced herself to look steadily at her captor. So what now, my lord? Broderick stared back at her coldly, clearly displeased with her lack of obvious fear. Rose remembered Lady Yorkley's veiled warnings about the night's rumoured entertainments, and felt a shiver of dread drift down her spine. Valiantly suppressing her fears, Rose lifted her chin proudly and returned Broderick's cold stare. Now, Miss Smythe, you're going to get down from this carriage, slow and steady-like, and then you are going to follow my friend, Squint, into that building just yonder. You aren't going to do anything so foolish as to try to run, and you certainly aren't going to draw any attention to the presence of such a pretty young thing being in the vicinity by screaming. Rose could feel her blood turn to ice in her veins at his words, but she did not give in to the fear coursing through her. As the door opened, she could see a henchman with a disfiguring scar next to his eye, unsurprised that the despicable knight would refer to the disfigurement in the man's nickname. Ignoring his offered hand, Rose gathered her skirts and stepped delicately down. She was followed by Broderick's voice. I will be right behind you, miss, and will not hesitate to give chase or use force if you do not behave yourself. Rose kept her chin firm and steadily ignored the hateful man, hurrying to follow Squint through the gloom of the dockyards to a dilapidated building. Fearing it might fall down around her, Rose kept darting her eyes around, looking for different ways to escape. It was little more than an overgrown shed from what she could see in the dim light cast by the shuttered lantern the knight's partner was carrying. Rose was certain she would be able to break free so long as she was left alone come daylight. She comforted herself with that thought as Broderick grew near. Grabbing her arm and tugging her to a chair near the corner of the room, Sir Broderick pushed her down and pulled her arms behind to tie them. Rose began to struggle in fear at being thus confined. He struck her with a stunning blow. Blinking the black spots from her eyes, Rose managed to retain her consciousness, but had not been able to contain the squeal of pain the back of his hand had inflicted upon her cheekbone. As her vision cleared, she could see him grinning at her. Rose scowled. You are despicable. Do you really think to get away with this? She demanded, not bothering with polite address. I absolutely do. Now that you are all trussed up, I can be on my way. See that you behave yourself, or Squint here will be happy to crack you for your troubles. Rose eyed them both with distaste. As she pulled on the ropes Broderick had deftly tightened around her wrists, while she had been briefly stunned by his blow. She struggled against the despair rising in her chest at the thought that her own rescue depended upon her wits and resources. The two men walked away, leaving her in the dark. Rose strained against the ropes at the same time as she frantically listened to the silence, wondering if anyone would return to watch over her, or what might be hiding in the dark near her. She did not think she would be able to tolerate with equanimity the presence of any rodents at the moment. Hopefully they were otherwise occupied, she thought, nearing hysteria. Before long, she was regretting her wish for light, as Squinch returned with his lantern and his eerie presence. She had not yet had him speak. Rose wondered if she should plead with him for her release, calculating how much she should offer to pay him for safely returning her to her home. Her frantic thoughts were soon put to an end as her rough-looking captor spoke for the first time.
"Don't be bothering to have yourself any ideas, miss. I ain't listening to you. Just sit yourself in your chair and wait until his lordship comes back and tells us what we're doing next."
Rose did not bother offering a reply, sitting in stony silence. She hoped the night would pass quickly. Alex stood on the street at the bottom of the stairs that led to the Smythe residence. It was taking him an inordinate amount of time to gather his gumption to go and knock on the door. He did not even know for sure if Lord Smythe was at home, but the Duke was dreading the upcoming conversation. Chastising himself for being such a lily-livered ninny, he forced himself to climb the stairs and knock on the door. The well-trained butler did not reveal his shock at discovering the Duke of Wrentham on the doorstep, merely ushering him into the receiving room with the promise of returning shortly with the information if my lord was at home to company. Alex cooled his heels in the elegantly appointed room, gazing about at the ivory wall hangings, wondering if Rose enjoyed this room. He rather thought she might hate it. Ivory did not seem to be the type of colour his Rose would enjoy overmuch. He was interrupted in his mental ramblings by the arrival of the diplomat baron himself. Not bothering with the formality of the butler's presence, Lord Smythe barged in. "You have a rather high level of audacity coming here like this, Wrentham," he almost snarled. "To what do I owe the displeasure?" Alex almost smiled at the older man's choice of words, but managed to contain his ill-timed amusement. "Please accept my sincere apologies, my lord. I am well aware that I am not a welcomed guest in your home, and I do not bring glad tidings. I will not waste your time with social niceties, as you do not wish to suffer my presence for any longer than necessary." His words seemed to pacify the irate baron, who seemed a little less growly as he asked Alex to sit down. "You might as well have a seat if you have something you need to say. It cannot be anything good if it has made you come here. Do you need a glass of something before you get to the details?" Alex could not contain his smile at his host's words. "That would be very much appreciated, my lord. Thank you very much." Lord Smythe made short work of pouring them each a glass of brandy. He seated himself across from the Duke and took a big gulp of the strong spirits. After releasing his breath, he prompted the young man before him. "Well, you had best get on with it. It isn't going to get any easier the longer you put off telling me whatever is so urgent as to bring you to my door." "No, you are quite correct, my lord, and time is of the utmost importance." He took a quick sip from his glass and another deep breath, before he finally launched into his tale. "I have reason to believe Sir Jason Broderick has abducted your daughter from the Rotherham ball." Lord Smythe nearly blew brandy through his nostrils as he exhaled in his shock over Wrentham's words. After a choking cough, he demanded, "What are you yammering about, Wrentham? What possible reason could Broderick have for abducting my Rosamond, and what would cause you to come to such a daft conclusion?" "Did Rose tell you about Broderick and his schemes?" "I cannot say why you think this is any of your business, you rapscallion, but yes, just today Rose told me what she had overheard at the Yorkley Musicale." "Well, it would seem Broderick has become aware of her interference in his affairs, and he has decided to make off with her. What has led you to this conclusion?" "I am quite certain you are being ridiculously foolish, your grace. The girl is probably right this moment dancing a hole in her slippers at the ball she was to attend this evening." He glanced at the clock on the mantel. "At this late hour, she should actually be winding her way home at some point soon." "Her friend, Lady Elizabeth, saw her speaking with Broderick at the ball. Since then she cannot be found. The only logical conclusion is that he has taken her."
But why on earth would he take her? It doesn't make a stitch of sense."
Alex could see that Lord Smythe could not conceive of anyone threatening his darling daughter. His instinctive fear for her safety was clouding his usual formidable logic. It is possible that he might know of her involvement in trying to thwart whatever schemes he has gotten up to. Lord Smythe had finally marshalled his logic and looked at the Duke with a cold, assessing stare. "How does it come to pass that you have knowledge of this situation, and that you are the one who is coming to me with these suspicions of my daughter's absence? Perhaps it is you who has made off with her. Are you trying to perpetrate another Smythe tragedy at the hands of a Wrentham?" Alex felt the anger rising in the back of his throat at the Baron's words. Making every effort to rein in his temper, he repeatedly reminded himself that getting into a brawl with the older man would solve nothing, even if it would relieve some of his pent-up frustrations. Through his gritted teeth, Alex tried to speak as respectfully as possible as he said, "It was not my brother's fault that your son was killed in battle, my lord." Seeing the Baron was about to protest hotly, the Duke hastened to continue. "In any case, that is far from the point of my visit. I can assure you that I would never do anything to harm your daughter. Rosamond was my dearest friend before our mutual tragedies. Despite the estrangement, I would still never intentionally hurt any lady, let alone her. I would do anything in my power to ensure her safety, which is exactly why I have bothered coming here to tell you about my concerns. If you do not wish to listen to what I have to say, that is your prerogative, my lord, and I will leave you to your own devices. But as soon as I leave here, I have every intention of searching for her. I will tear apart this entire city if I have to, but I will ensure the safe return of your daughter." The Duke's impassioned declaration arrested the Baron's attention, and he was again eyeing his guest speculatively. "I am once again prompted to ask why you are so very concerned about this matter. She may have been your best friend once upon a time, but that is surely no longer the case." Alex did not want to get into the details of the meetings he and Rose had been having with her father. "I feel as though I am partially responsible for her predicament, as her interference with Broderick was somewhat motivated by her concerns for my welfare." "How could you possibly know that?" Lord Smythe demanded. Alex felt the heat rising in his cheeks, but he tried to avoid the subject. Making as if to rise, he began. "If you do not wish my presence in your home, I will be glad to take my leave. I merely came by to tell you that I am very much afraid for your daughter's safety." Before the Baron was able to respond to Alex's words, the gentlemen were interrupted by a commotion in the foyer. Lady Smythe could be heard demanding of the butler, "Is my lord husband at home? I must speak to him at once." The butler must have hesitated momentarily, for she repeated herself, "At once, I tell you." The Baron went to the door of the receiving room. "I am here, my lady. What seems to be the trouble?" Lady Smythe hurried toward her husband. "You must do something, my lord. I am near my wit's end. He has taken my baby girl." Lord Smythe looked beyond his wife to see that she had been accompanied by Lord Dunbar. Gathering his wife into the crook of his arm, the Baron said calmly, "Perhaps we ought to all adjourn to the receiving room. Won't you join us, my lord?" The trio made their way back into the room Lord Smythe had just vacated, but they were brought up short by Lady Smythe's shock at seeing the Duke of Wrentham in her front room. "What is he doing here, my lord? Surely this night has enough drama in it, without adding a Wrentham to the mess." Lord Smythe smiled at his wife and urged her to a seat. "It would seem he is here with the same concerns as you have." Looking at Lord Dunbar questioningly, he continued speaking to his wife. "I am curious to know how you have arrived at your concerns." "Oh, my lord, Rosamond's friend, Lady Elizabeth, and this dear gentleman came to me at the ball to say that our daughter has gone missing. They are under the impression that Sir Broderick is somehow involved. I am unsure why they would think that nice man could have anything to do with anything bad happening to my daughter, but anyhow, she was nowhere to be found at the Rothrams. Of course, we did not do as thorough of a search as I would have liked, but the nice young people assured me that alerting everyone to her absence would be harmful to her reputation. Lord Dunbar was quite convinced that we shall be able to recover her before anything irrevocable is done to her, and no one needs to be any the wiser. I am unsure if you will think that it was acceptable to leave the ball without her, but his lordship was quite convinced that it would be best if I was to return home and discuss the matter with you." Lord Smythe patted his wife's hand soothingly. "You did just the right thing, my dear. Perhaps you ought to go lie down now. I am sure this has been quite the shock for you." Lady Smythe began to rise from her chair to do as he suggested, but then thought better of it and instilled a bit of iron to her drooping spine. "I do believe, my lord, that it would be best if I remain here and wait to see if there is anything I can do to help in this strange situation." Looking toward the Duke for the first time since her initial shock, she continued, "And I really must know what Wrentham is doing in my receiving room." The Baron appeared nonplussed by his wife's words, and Alex could see that Wesley was not going to step in to cover the awkward moment. So the Duke stepped forward to explain his presence. "I know I am not an invited guest in your home, my lady. However, I came to inform you and your husband about your daughter's abduction." "But how do you come to be involved? Are you here to make demands of us?" Lady Smythe was clearly struggling to keep the shrill from her voice, but it echoed slightly off the high ceiling despite her efforts. "Of course not, my lady. I merely have information to share. I suspect Broderick thinks he has snatched her without anyone being the wiser, so we might have the advantage. If we can manage to find her tonight, we should be able to keep her safe and still thwart whatever schemes he is plotting." Lady Smythe gazed at the Duke rather dazedly. "But I really do not understand any of this. Why would Sir Broderick do something so dastardly? He seems like such a nice man. Surely he must realize that if he wanted to pay her his respects, he would be more than welcome." The Baron and the Duke both gazed at her with amazement, before sharing a remarkably companionable look of commiseration. Lady Smythe's look of confusion was changing once more into an accusation. "I think you are just trying to divert our attention from your own dastardly deeds, and placing the blame on poor Sir Broderick. What have you done with my daughter, you despicable rake?" Alex was struck silent by his surprise over the lady's misguided opinions. His shock grew to new levels when Lord Smythe stepped in to his defence. "My lady wife, I am amazed that you would even consider thinking about allowing Sir Broderick to call upon our daughter. He is the dastardly fellow in all of this, not his Grace." At the look of incredulity written upon his wife's face, the Baron could not help laughing slightly. Yes, I know. I would normally have nothing good to say about Wrentham, but under these circumstances, I do believe him. I do not wish to get into all the details with you at this time, but I am already aware of Rosamond's involvement with Broderick and his schemes. She had gleaned some information, which she passed on to me just this afternoon. If his Grace tells us that she has been abducted by the knight, then, unfortunately, I am inclined to believe him. And in that case, we need to be as polite as possible in order to gain his assistance in retrieving her as quickly and safely as possible." Seeing that his wife was now beginning to look mutinous, Lord Smythe continued, "If you do not think you can manage to be civil to his Grace while he is in our house, then it might be best if you retire to your room and wait until he takes his leave." Lady Smythe looked flummoxed by her husband's declaration, but aside from casting a glare in the direction of the Duke, she did not add anything further. She daintily sank back down onto the settee and clasped her hands in her lap. Plastering a reasonably pleasant smile onto her face, she looked back at her husband and asked, "What are you planning to do to ensure that we do not lose another one of our children, my lord?" The three gentlemen in the room shuffled their feet uncomfortably for a moment, before Alex finally took control. "Thank you for hearing me out, my lord. I took the liberty of arranging for some of my men to report to me here, as I wish to inform you of all that I know at the earliest possible moment. Earlier today I had set a couple of my runners to watching Broderick, so I am confident we shall soon be receiving word of where Rosie might be being kept." He did not even notice that he had slipped into referring to her in such a familiar way, but when he caught the Baron's sceptical look, he felt the heat rising in his face. Wesley finally stepped forward at the perfect moment to relieve the Duke of his discomfort, drawing attention to his presence. "I am unsure if Wrentham has explained this to you yet, my lord, but I have already told your wife what Lady Elizabeth saw this evening." Yes, my lord. His Grace already told me about it before you got here. I do believe he is right, and this is an urgent matter. We ought not to sit around here dithering. Your Grace, when do you expect to hear word from your men? I, too, had set men to watching the night today after I had spoken with my daughter. Hopefully they will be able to report something useful before too very long." "That is most excellent, my lord," Alex responded. "I cannot say for certain when I will hear from my men. If they cannot leave their post, it might be difficult for them to get a message to me. It might be best if we set out on a search ourselves. I cannot be comfortable with the thought of Miss Smythe in the clutches of that man for a moment longer than necessary." "It has already been longer than necessary," Lord Smythe grumbled. "I am still trying to understand why the girl took so long in coming to me with her information. Perhaps we could have prevented this entire scene from even happening." "Hopefully you will have all the time in the world to discuss your questions with her, after we have gotten her to safety, my lord. I would like to demand what she was thinking to go off with him in the first place. According to Lady Elizabeth, it does not appear as though the dastard used force." Lord Smythe again gazed at the Duke, with a look that bordered on empathetic. "Surely you realize, your Grace, that my daughter is not one that enjoys being told what to do. If you did anything so foolish as to tell her not to speak with the knight, then that could explain this entire scenario." Alex grinned. "I am becoming aware of that tendency, my lord. However, the blame for this cannot be placed at my feet. I did not tell her anything, nor did I try to tell her what to do, aside from be careful, which I think is innocuous enough that it should not lead her to go off in the company of the villain of the piece." Lord Smythe nodded. "It is possible that he threatened her, or someone she loves, in some way, in order to secure her cooperation. There is no blame to be placed, your Grace, at least not in this particular instance," he interjected darkly. Seeing his friend Lord Dunbar twitch as though he wished to defend the Duke, Alex caught his eye and shook his head slightly, quelling the impulse. Getting to his feet, Alex turned to face his barren host. "Thank you for seeing me, my lord. I hope I shall soon have gladder tidings. I am not sure what you intend to do, but I cannot bear to sit here waiting to hear what my runners have gleaned. If you shall be home, would you be so kind as to interview them and send word to my house if there is anything pertinent to the search? I am going to swing by my house and see if any messages have arrived there, and then I am going to pursue a few leads that I can already think of from research I have previously completed." The Baron, too, had risen to his feet during this speech. "I feel as though I ought to accompany you, but perhaps if we were to divide our efforts, we could get twice as much ground covered. I also feel that I cannot just stand here waiting. Since you have arranged for some of your men to report here, why do we not agree to meet back here in a couple of hours and share whatever we have been able to find out? Then, if your men are here, we can speak to them together and decide how best to proceed from there." It was obvious to all in the room that Lord Smythe was doing his best to be cordial and make the most of an uncomfortable situation. He, no doubt, appreciated the Duke's offer to help, despite the tensions between their two families. Lady Smythe was not so accommodating. "He cannot return here, my lord," she hissed. Alex controlled his amused smile over the uncomfortable look that descended upon the Baron's face at his wife's words. "I have spoken, my lady. It is best to be done this way." At her continued mumblings of disagreement, Lord Smythe looked at her sternly. "He is a duke. Even though he is young and inexperienced, there will be doors he can open that are closed to me. It shall be a productive cooperation. We will be able to accomplish the most in the shortest amount of time if we work together. Do you not want our daughter home as soon as possible?" "Well, of course I do. Do not be ridiculous." "Then don't you be ridiculous, my lady. We need his Grace's help, so make an effort to be gracious about it." Lady Smythe's colour was high, and she looked uncomfortable to the extreme when Alex made good his escape from the room with Wesley in tow. As they rode away, Lord Dunbar whistled low. I can safely say I have never seen such a scene as I just witnessed. I never would have thought I would see the day that the mother of a young, unwed girl would be so rude to an unmarried duke. It just isn't done. He chuckled before asking, What could you have possibly done to put you so beyond the pale in their eyes? Surely you know about the feud between our two families? Alex replied, not bothering to explain any further, intent upon the task at hand. I did, of course, although I think it completely daft. But I had no idea it was to such an extreme. The woman wanted to have you tossed bodily from her home. Wesley was incredulous. Never mind that for now. We have more important things to think upon right now. Are you sure you are up to this adventure tonight? I am shocked you would even ask, Your Grace. I would be loath to be anywhere else. Thank you, my friend. I so appreciate your help. Now, since we are both dressed for something other than the low adventure we are about to face, I propose that we each head home and quickly divest ourselves of our finery, and meet at my house as soon as possible. Hopefully there will be some word to give us direction from there. Wesley saluted smartly and headed off to his rooms without another word. Alex urged his mount to a faster pace, and within a couple of minutes pulled up in the mews behind his house. Tossing his reins to his waiting groom, Alex began striding purposefully toward the door before he thought better of it, and turned back to exchange a few words with the groom. There is a strong possibility I shall need your help tonight. How many strong, sharp, discreet men could we muster from the household staff for what could be a rough fight? The groom did not so much as blink over this question, quickly replying, I should think we have at least 20 that could fit that description, Your Grace. At the back of his mind, Alex wondered what kind of adventures his father had gotten up to, that the staff would be so sanguine about what he was asking. Hiding his misgivings, the Duke replied to the waiting servant, Very well, thank you. I require more information before we need to summon everyone. Please keep yourself in readiness, but it would be best if the others get their rest while they can. When the Duke entered his house, he was surprised to see his butler pacing with his tiger in tow. Alex was glad to see the youngster, whom he had set off in pursuit of the man watching him at Burlington House. Pete, am I ever glad to see you? You two look troubled, which tells me you have information for me. The butler looked relieved to see his master arrive. There have been a few messages for you, Your Grace. Excellent. I need to change and I need to hurry. Could the two of you accompany me to my chambers so that we can kill multiple birds with one stone? Your Grace, I do not think that would be entirely proper, the butler huffed. Mayhap not, but a lady's safety is very much in jeopardy. I do not think we can afford to be overly fastidious at a time like this. Come along. Alex did not await a response. He was amused and relieved to hear his butler's heavy sigh, closely followed by the sound of his footsteps following the Duke up to his chambers. Alex was reminded of how happy he was that his valet was not the usual highly strung sort as he walked into the room with the other two in tow. He barely showed a reaction as the Duke started stripping off his elegant clothes. The valet was a little more flustered when Alex demanded his roughest clothing to be readied. But, Your Grace, he began to protest, then quailed under the Duke's stern glare. Very well, Your Grace. Alex grinned. All right, Pete, out with it. What do you know? Pete quit gazing about at the rich surroundings and brought his attention back to his master. Gulping back his nerves, he launched into his tale. That bad man what was watching Your Grace and his lady friend, he knew all the trails there was to find and took me on a merry chase. But I managed no problems, Your Grace, 'cause I used to hunt with me pa before I came to work for Your Grace. Holding on to his patience, Alex smiled encouragingly as his valet fussed around him. I am glad you managed so well, Pete. Were you able to find out anything useful? I did, Your Grace, Pete grinned. The first bad man met up with another bad man, and he says to him, Tell his lordship that the chip made up with who I swear was the Duke of Rentham. Wait a minute, Pete. So the bad man was actually watching Miss Rose, not me? Would seem so, Your Grace. Were you able to find out anything else? The second bad man flipped him a coin and he went off, so I figured he wasn't going to be of much more use, so I followed the second chap as he left their meeting. I hope that was all right, Your Grace. I am quite certain you made the right choice, Pete. Where did the second man go?
He was a fair bit harder to keep track of, since the first thing he went and did was to climb into a hack. But I was able to grab onto the back just as it took off, so I managed just fine, Your Grace.
Would you be able to show me where the places were that you've been?
I'm fair and certain that I could, Your Grace, but I knows for sure where we was when the act stopped, so I don't have to show you. The chap runs up the stairs to a fairly posh house and goes in. I waits and not much happened. But I did ask one of the kids what were running around who lived in that there house. They says it's Sir Jason Broderick, Your Grace. You would know where he lives, right?
Yes, thank you, Pete. I do know where that is. And that just confirms what I already knew about Broderick. But I might need you to help me find the men you saw. They might be in a position to help us find the lady.
The lady? Has something happened to your friend, Your Grace?
Yes, Pete. I guess I failed to tell you that bit. We believe that Broderick has abducted her, and we need to find her as quickly as possible. She might be in grave danger. At this point, the butler stepped in and shared the messages he had received. Alex was finished dressing, and Wesley was waiting impatiently to know what was going on. The two set off in search of Rose.